There are specific moments in your life where you just know that what you're about to experience is going to be a historic landmark. The types of content that only comes around every so often and it inspired whatever came after. It might be old and a bit rough around the edges, but just looking at it tells you that this is going to be a masterclass in its given medium. The Lord of the Rings have that now, since it's 20 years old. Wait, holy shit, 20 years? Ugh. Man, I'm old. Anyway, but when you start it up and see that prologue, you just feel that this is worth all the praise it has gotten throughout the years. That is what you get with Akira. It might be from 1982, and art, paneling, flow of action and storytelling has come a long way since then, but just by looking at this manga, holding it in your hands, you instantly know that this is a piece of history worth not just remembering, but experiencing as well. There's this heavy aura surrounding it, telling you to brace yourself. This is something else. And it might sound like I'm just hyping it up because it has its legendary status. However, that is not the case. Just for picking up the first volume, I instantly knew that this was going to be unlike any other series that I have read. No matter if character, story, art or themes were complex or not, this would stand out among its peers in a good way. This is Katsuhiro Otomo flexing on everyone. This is the legendary Akira. Hello, this is my name is Daidarius and welcome to the review of Akira. This is probably the most renowned manga that I have ever had the pleasure of reading. It, together with Dragon Ball, can probably be cited as the first real peak of interest in the Western market. It ended up spawning a movie in 1988 that many consider one of the most influential anime ever, ending up pushing Otomo to do more anime-related work instead of manga later on. Akira spawns 120 chapters and was published as a bi-weekly seinen in Young magazine from December 20th, 1982 until June 25th, 1990. It was collected into 6 massive volumes and was later released to a Western audience from 1988 until 1995 and was a complete overhaul of the original. Otomo changed the artwork, paneling and speech bubbles to work in a Western reading direction, as well as handpicking Steve Olive to do the coloring to match what Western comic readers expected back then. 38 issues was done by Epic Comics. Now, many different editions has been done throughout the years, but recently Kodansha Comics are printing Akira in its original Japanese format without the colors. Now, I don't own the paperback edition and will instead base this review on the 35th anniversary edition. This version of Akira is exceptionally to hold and read. The gigantic size makes Otomo's art pop and the hardcover makes it easy to handle while reading. Every volume comes with a dust cover that houses the original cover, but has a manga panel underneath. The paper quality is rough but light and makes the ink spring off the pages, as well as fits the grittier aesthetic of the manga. The first couple of pages are also in color and works well as a volume opener. The box set comes with additional material, but the one I'll focus on later is the Akira Club volume. Now, enough of the volumes. I could go on for hours regarding background information or just the volumes themselves. Just know that this edition is some of the best volumes to read, period. Let me know if the same goes for the paperback edition. Now, let's jump on to the story. Kaneda is a young leader of a motorcycle gang in Neo Tokyo in 2019. He, together with his friend Tetsuo, stumbles upon an old man with a number tattooed in his palm one night. A meeting that ends up sending Tetsuo to the hospital and Kaneda in the crossfire between the colonel with the military and the terrorist group opposing them. Narrowly escaping with his life, he now wants to know what is going on. Tetsuo awakens psychic abilities after the crash and is brought in by the colonel to further develop his abilities, with the side effect of becoming more and more mentally unstable. Meanwhile, Kaneda teams up with Kei from the terrorist group to find out what the military, the old man with the number tattoo on his palm, a mystery drug, and Tetsuo has to do with this name that keeps popping up: Akira. This leads to multiple confrontations, broken alliances, conspiracies, and utter destruction. A happy ending seems impossible. This is a disgustingly downplayed summary of the story. There's so much going on in here that no matter what, I would fail at presenting the story in a fascinating and inspiring way. Just know that the story is more or less divided into two halves. Before Akira and after. And that midway point, fucking hell. But for now, let's talk about the art. The art in Akira is visually a product of its time. The characters has this 80s look with very little personality or animation shining through. Shading on clothes is also clunky, rough and uncomplimentary. However, there are multiple times where Otomo shows great art when depicting these characters, and it's obvious that he becomes better and more comfortable with drawing them. The character art style is not necessarily bad, but instead shows how far the craft have come in 40 years. And it should be judged with what was the norm back then, which shows it to be better than the average manga from the 80s. Where I can't say anything negative is everything else. Backgrounds, machines, construction, destruction. The fact that Otomo more or less did that in 2 weeks is mind-boggling. The intricate details, the precision in lines, the perfect perspective. Everything is flawless and some of the best background art and machine art I have ever seen anywhere. And when you mix that with the psychic destruction that Tetsuro brings, you have the template for showing impact and momentum. The quote-unquote camera is static, but this allows Otomo to focus on blocking, framing, lighting and continuity instead of action flow. This lets the art pop and have an identity of its own. It has more to say than just the presented story. Every location has a personality to show and a theme to convey, and it just downright works. Just the destruction scene at the end of volume 3 alone is a masterclass in visual storytelling. No words used, just imagery and storytelling. Mwah! Perfection. If I had to choose my favorite panel though, then I just picked the complete 6th volume, because the art is that good. Now I want to spoil as little as I possibly can in this review, and that also means not going into too much details regarding art or anything else for that matter. But to sum up the art, it is definitely among some of the all-time greats. Now let's talk about what I liked and disliked about Akira as a whole. This time around, there is exceptionally little that I didn't like about the manga. It's mostly personal preferences or just a few shortcomings, but here goes. Tetsuo's character change after getting his abilities is way too sudden and comes across as rushed, just so the story can capitalize on the setup it provides. This is generally my biggest gripe, since most of the story hang on his character arc, and this initial change is vital to the following story beats. All the other characters doesn't get the arc that the story needs, and they end up feeling a tad bland, since nothing in the story seems to push them to change. And considering the events in the story, everyone should be forced to change in some form or fashion. There's also this setup in the beginning that focuses on Kanada's gang as being outsiders from society and having trouble with school. This is wasted and never returned to again, which should just have been cut, since it takes up pages that could have been spent on character development or the story. And the final thing is Akira himself. He is underutilized. The only impact he has is his presence, which is fine, but leaves a lot to be desired from his character or influence on the story direction. Considering the lead up to the ending, more influence, action or uses of Akira in the story would have elevated the story more. There are a few things more I could cover, such as action flow of characters is clunky and doesn't emit momentum or make it easier on the eyes to follow the intended flow, characters not always being drawn correctly, faces being hard to distinguish, and more. But it is of such little importance compared to the overall product that I'm just gonna end it here. Instead, let's take a look at some of the great things that this manga gives you. Considering my gripes with Tetsuo's sudden character change, I will say that everything else afterwards is masterful. The different stages he goes through, his outlook, desires, disapproval and acceptance of the situation is fluent and pushes the story in interesting directions. He even has the best holy fucking shit moment in the whole story. I won't spoil it, but believe me, you are in for a treat. The story itself is also way more gripping than it have any right to be. You won't get far into the first volume before the mystery, story, intrigue and pacing kicks into high gear and just puts the pedal to the metal and takes you on the best race tour of your life. And even after most mysteries have been solved, it still tries to keep you as a reader on your toes to keep things interesting. Especially Volume 6 as a whole is a masterpiece in this regard. The seriousness of the story also never gets cringy or distracting. It instead leaves room for more cinematic storytelling that more often than not lets it be up to the reader to figure out the subtext. And there are multiple times where dialogue is not used and the images have to tell the story instead. And these show don't tell are used with an expertise that leaves the greatest impact on the reader. They're not used often, but are utilized at the most opportune times. Now there's a lot more that just works in this manga, be it consistent characterization, laser-focused plot, gorgeous art, especially in the last volume, the surprisingly grounded setting, the visual storytelling in the background, and more. But instead of listing all of it, just know that Akira excels in most of them. Never have I read a manga that could have this many hype moments, but also as many silent ones. One thing I will focus on is that with the 35th anniversary edition, you get the book Akira Club. This is the perfect way to end your read-through of Akira, since it's not just an art book, but a look behind the curtain of its production. What went into the designs, story, books, and more. Not only does it focus on the original run, but also an insight to the Western version. What challenges did Otomo have with this? And of course the movie. There are also some information that gives more context to some of the story beats. All this gave me my most fulfilled reading experience in a long time. Now I want to focus on more, but this section has gone on for long enough and most of my praises regard spoilers, so I'll leave it here. To sum up, Akira is a manga that fully lives up to its legacy. It has issues with early characterizations of Tetsuo, setup that leads nowhere, and doesn't use Akira himself that well. The ending is a bit anticlimactic and it might ending up leaving you wanting more. However, the story grips you from the get-go and will keep escalating until the very end that makes it difficult to put down. The art does vary on characters in the beginning, but it does get better. Everything else is beautifully drawn and Volume 6 rivals most manga out there with its stunning art and paneling. The pacing is perfect and besides a few hiccups in Volume 1, no page is wasted. Everything is used to its full potential. The story will touch you, it will let you look at work that came afterwards and let you see its influence. It will also answer for you, what if manga was a movie? Not a movie adaptation of a manga, but the manga itself was a movie and you were reading it. It's a bit difficult to explain, but that is how it felt. There's very little I can say about it without spoiling it, and I don't want you to read it. I need you to read it. It is one of those stories that everyone needs to experience at least once in their lives. And just like the Lord of the Rings trilogy is still, to this day, the perfect 12-hour movie, Akira is, with no exception, an epic masterpiece. So, Akira, have you read it? What do you think about it? And if not, how do you want to read it? Digitally, paperback, or the 35th anniversary edition? Whatever you think, and whatever you think about my take on Akira, comment below me your thoughts. As always, until I see you in the next video, remember to stay awesome. See ya! I think it's about time for me to get my Gundam on. Later.